Welcome in Food for Thought. I'm Karen Audrey. Today we are talking about Orthodox religion and therapeutic applications of Orthodoxy. I have very interesting guests today, Thaddeus Patrick, right? And 2mørVs Marvin. So Patrick is a YouTuber, also coach, therapist, you name it. But I would like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm Thaddeus Patrick. I do Orthodox Christian coaching and therapy. And so I use a lot of early church, early Christian writers who had a very practical spirituality that I think is very needed today. And it's very strong integration between theology and how we view our own hearts and what we do that brings about peace and that makes us into truly loving and sacrificial people. And I think psychological peace is at the core of all of that. It's found there in Christ and in understanding ourselves. And so I do coaching practice. I use a lot of psychology too, a little bit of everything. Um, and then I also have my YouTube channel, Thaddeus Creative, which I have currently have about 10 videos on there on a variety of different topics.
Guys, please check it out. The links are in the description. Like, subscribe, check it out. And 2mørVs. 2mørVs is a musician and also an Orthodox Christian and a YouTuber. Could you please tell a little bit about your work?
Of course. Well, I'm a musician. I would say an Orthodox musician. I started out working with Akira the Don and doing like recording stuff for his remixes of Jordan Peterson and other interesting people like David Goggins, for example. And through that, I found a way to make meaningful music myself. I stopped writing and technically making music for a long time before that because I didn't know what to write about exactly. I was doing a lot of punk rock, and while that's nice, it's mostly just crying about your ex-girlfriend. and I and I think it's maybe a little helpful, but not really meaningful to do like all the time. And there comes a point when you have said everything, and so I didn't know what to write about. And then again, I found this whole like meaning wave, lo-fi stuff, and I thought, okay, that's a way where I can contextualize my music in a proper and productive way. So I started working on an album with Jordan Peterson about believing in God, but from an outside of the church perspective to a degree. And then at the same time, I also worked on an album with Jonathan Pajot called Pentecost for the Zombie Apocalypse, the musical. And throughout, like while I was working on this album, I was confronted obviously with Orthodox symbolism, and the way in which it's all-encompassing. So I was caught up in the New Age to a degree, and I really tried to do everything I could to hold those beliefs because they gave me a form of comfort. The idea of what reincarnation, for example, and also this, in a sense, moral relativism took away a form of responsibility from me. And that's obviously devastating, but it's also comforting if you're doing a lot of wrong things. And while I was working on it, I was confronted with the inevitability of the Christian story and the Christian pattern. And Jonathan hooked me up with a priest, and I started to question him a lot about Christianity and also the New Age beliefs. I tried to compare them to one another, and where there were discrepancies, I tried to find out which one was actually closer the truth. And at one point, I was unable to hold up my my previous beliefs, and I was very much convinced of the truth of Christianity, and thought to myself, well, if I seriously believe and can't get out of believing that Christianity, especially Orthodox Christianity, is true, then I have to join the church, because everything else would be stupid. If you believe that God came down to tell us how to live our lives, let's say, and how to approach Him and all of that, and then you don't do it, then that's just that's just stupid. So I did that. I looked for a church and talked to the priest, and I think 3 months later I joined the church. What I try to do now is like emphasize Orthodox ideas and Orthodoxy in general through my music, because I think ideas are easier to approach if they are embedded in music. Recently, I ventured away from that to a degree. I started working with you, Kara, on an album, a short album that follows a scene from Blade Runner 2049, like the giant hologram scene. I think everyone is familiar with it. And while I was doing that, I also went into back to my musical roots, let's say, to punk rock, and started writing from that perspective again as well, but with let's say, with a Christian twist. None of the both of these albums aren't out yet, but we're working on them relentlessly, and I hope I can present them soon.
Yeah, those are very impressive musical art pieces that you do. I love it. I hope people will see it very soon. Yeah, that was quite a journey. Patrick, how about you, actually? How did you become an Orthodox Christian?
I started out kind of a mainline evangelical Protestant with the rock band worship church, and there was Pentecostal charismatic influences. So there were people that believed in speaking in tongues, where it was like the incomprehensible languages and stuff, but no one was super zealous about it. And I ended up going to Bible college at first to get a degree in evangelical youth ministry. So, running teenage programs and games and stuff like that. And then I ended up realizing how interested I was in psychology. So I got a psychology degree and also a Protestant Bible and theology degree at this Christian university. And afterwards, there was a trickle of students I discovered who were becoming Orthodox Christians from this Bible college. And I was friends with a lot of them, and they introduced me to Orthodoxy. And I had really been convicted during my time at the Bible college to be to healthily doubt myself, to realize I can be wrong. I don't know everything. I should learn at least a little about everything before I judge it. My English professor in particular had trained me in that when you read, you understand the author. You don't judge them. You don't share your opinion. You understand what they have to say. And once you've put in that labor, then you have the right to speak. And so I decided to apply that, and I would just look at this Orthodox thing because I'd never heard of it. I just had heard about a little bit about Catholicism, and then I knew lots of different Protestant denominations and had talked to a lot of Protestants and seen how much as much as they were sincere and had many things I admired about them, they also were in levels of disagreement that they couldn't all be teaching the same religion. Like with how they would, the Calvinists believe that God picked people to go to hell. They can't. Yeah, I wrestled with that, but I kind of buried it. But once Orthodoxy came along, I went to a service and hated it. I hated it. I hated it so much. I stood in the back and I prayed it would end. I was like, Lord, please help this end. And he did not answer that prayer because 2 years later I was Orthodox. But I went to my friends from that circle convinced me to go with them to a monastery because for a few-month window I was unemployed, and they told me like, we won't charge you anything for the gas money for our trip to this monastery. This was a very famous monastery, St. Herman of Alaska, which is where Father Seraphim Rose is. He founded it, and he's buried there. And the simple version is the whole time God showed me I was very judgmental, and all the things I was judging, I wasn't being objective at all. Like I thought, I prided myself on, I'm going to be open-minded, and I wasn't. One example is I was judging them for kissing pictures of dead people, and it wasn't even like theological disagreement. It was just disgust. Like I was like, that's so weird and crazy. And then I just recalled, I think it was God, but I recalled that I have a picture of our family cat that we had for 15 years, and his name was Godzilla. And whenever I see that picture, I would kiss it because I missed Godzilla so much. And I remember just feeling this conviction of, if your cat's picture is worth kissing, how much more are the people who died sacrificing everything for the Lord, his closest children. And I realized that was a good point, and that I should stop judging them. And when I left the monastery, they gave me a book called, I would highly recommend, you can get on Amazon. It's called Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives. And it's by Elder Thaddeus of Vitovnica, who's my patron saint. And that book was the first thing that my heart kind of softened. When I started reading it, I felt like everything I had been looking for in my psychology degree and my Bible degree, all this advanced theological study, whatever, this simple little monk with his simple little advice in Serbia knew more about healing a person than all my studies. And it was really the first point where there was actually a little bit of hunger for orthodoxy. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe there's some cool stuff here. There's cool stuff everywhere. Buddhists have cool stuff too. So I'm gonna look into church history and probably find out that the Orthodox are oversimplifying things. They say they haven't changed. They're the ancient church, whatever. Everyone says they're right. And so I spent about 3 months reading early Christian writings, and I hit this point. Honestly, it only took about 3 months. I even visited a Catholic church because I wanted to consider I could even be wrong right now on this whole Orthodox thing. But I studied church history. I read arguments from Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, atheists, and I just became very quickly convinced that the Orthodox had a really good historical argument, that they had the strongest roots in the early church by far, and that the Catholics had changed a lot, and they had even come up with the development of doctrine to explain why they had changed so much. And they would say they didn't contradict, but they hadn't just created new stuff. There was a lot of contradictions. So it was hard for me to really see anything else as even a possibility anymore after just like 3 months of reading early Christian writings. But eventually what happened was that got me to go back to the church. Even though I did not like Orthodox services, I was used to rock bands and constant enjoyment and entertainment. So being still was a challenge. It was a fast spiritually, but once I studied the history, I was like, it was a good enough argument. I felt convicted. I had to at least attend some more services. And over the next year, between attending the services, reading Elder Thaddeus, reading St. Paisios, reading some other saints, I realized that it was like I had found the true therapy, that it was like, this brings peace. Like even the stillness of the services, it has a therapeutic value. It's a fast, like I said. Like my heart is so used to being constantly filled with things of the world, which it's not bad to have those things in your heart to like enjoy music, etc. But I was on like a high, like it was an idol or an addiction. And so to be still multiple times a week and to not get anything you want just for these little phases and to just have to be still, it centers you, and it, even psychologically and in other religions, we know this is true. I think it just goes even deeper. But yeah, eventually I realized like this is the healing I've looked for all my life. Like this is something that can actually possibly even make me altruistic. And that was something I was always searching for, was as evangelical Protestants, we would do good deeds and would be nice to each other. But when once someone didn't respond how you wanted, you were angry. And I was like, that's not love. Like, I know this isn't love, but I'm like this and I don't know how to change. Like, I know I want to be altruistically loved, like unconditionally. And I know I want to give that, but nothing here seems to be able to lead to that. And it was the Orthodox saints and Elder Thaddeus who I was like, these guys seem like they actually have it. Like you could say anything to them and it would not destroy their love for you. You could hate them, you could crucify them, and they would still look at you with perfect love, which is what Christ is. Like that's his whole deal, is that he loves you no matter what. The church fathers say he loves the devil. The devil just doesn't want his love. But our God is love. It is his nature, and he loves everyone. And so the whole purpose of the therapy is to actually acquire that love and to be a temple that bears God and his perfect love inside of us. And then we're the priests who give out this gift he gives us that is himself to other people, to the animals, and to all creation. And so yeah, so that's what won me. I always say church history got me in the door, and then the actual spiritual life is what converted me 2 years later. So
Wow. I identify with therapeutic effect. So when I was baptized Orthodox, I became an Orthodox Christian when I was 2 years old. So we did not go to church because in a village there was a drive-by bus to the nearest church. The church was not in every village there. And it was just inconvenient, also expensive, also time consuming. It was not easily accessible. So church was something very valued. We would go rarely, only on holidays. So it would be almost a celebration to go to church. It was not something every Sunday routine, but it was like on Easter, we would go to church and we would stand in this beautiful presence, and you kind of feel small in that very tall church building with this round ceiling. And I always liked the sound and the smell. Like it's the thing that I associate. And it associated the sound and the smell associated with celebration, peace, calming down for me. And when I was depressed, like when I was 16 or something, I lived in the city. The church was there in the city. I just had to get there. And it was a rough time for me. So I go into the actual building, into the actual church, and I smell it, and I hear this kind of sound of the dome, let's say. And it had this effect where like everything just went out. And it was like aha moment. Like even now telling the story, I get goosebumps. It felt like a divine presence for me. It was not intellectual. And I think different people experience it that come to the religion in different ways. For me, it was sense of smell, the sound, the feeling that brought me there. And also relief. I felt bad about myself, and I felt relieved that all of that was okay. I'm loved. I'm seen somehow. I can't describe it right now. Our memory is replaying little theater in the head, perhaps romanticizing it, but still, I hold that experience in very high regard. Marvin, how about you? Like, did you have that therapeutic experience like Patrick and
I would, I would definitely say so. So my problem while approaching Christianity to a degree was that I thought, even if Christianity is true, that there's no place for me in the church because of my my general sinfulness. And you know, neither the people nor I didn't really think God didn't want me there. Like his unconditional love, while I obviously couldn't and still can't fully grasp it, it was still a given for me to a degree. But especially like the people in the church, like any parish or whatever, I thought, well, I can't find a place there. And so I'm just gonna stay on the outside and know about Christ. But then I was confronted with the story of Saint Christopher, who I stole this phrase from Jonathan Pajot, is kind of my unofficial patron saint. I heard his story and his denial of the normal approach to the church and to God, like his denial of fasting and prayer and all of that. Like, I can't do that. And then God, through the hermit, gave him a task that he could fulfill, in which he could serve God without having to make steps that he just couldn't take. And that, for the first time, gave me this understanding of how like even a monster, generally someone who doesn't fit in, can still, like, does have a place in the church. And when I approached it, it became more apparent. So even now when I go to church, I still have this overwhelming sense of A, this is where I belong, and then B, this realization of my own shortcomings, but still in combination with that, the wish of God, let's say, to have me in his presence and his love for me. And one interesting bit about that, I mean, I will only know for sure after we died, but when I was engaging in like when I was taking psychedelics a lot, back in like 2015, 16, 17, up to 2019, I think, there was always, like, I experienced these drugs not mainly as altercations of my consciousness, but as the presence of different consciousnesses. And there was one presence that I could never really conceptualize. I didn't know who that was. And then a few years went by, and I bought my first icon of Christ and started praying in front of it regularly. And then this presence made itself known again, like very specific feeling. I can't describe it. And so my guess is that in the past has been Christ who has protected me, because there were moments where technically, you know, death wasn't so far away, let's say. And in general, like when you engage with psychedelics, then you're opening yourself up to many influences. And the fact that I wasn't taken hostage by anything malevolent like other people have, is something that I attribute to God. So there's this, this therapeutic feeling, this presence of Christ, and the things that he sends to us, let's say. I have experienced them and experience them still, and experience them as something very transformative.
Yeah, at the core of all Orthodox theology is the direct personal encounter with Christ. I really like to. I have like a whole library of little metaphors I use, but one of my favorites is coming especially from a Western world. Um, Rationalism and this high emphasis on the concept of truth being like accurate statements and data about reality, having the correct doctrines about God. Like that's really come to dominate, especially in Catholicism and a lot of Protestantism, with the exception of the charismatics, who I mentioned earlier, I had some influence from, who go the opposite direction, where it's all so experiential that they lose the value of the structure and the rationality. But it is primarily a personal encounter. And we see this. I mean, Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. Um, Abraham hosted dinner for these three angels that basically are the Trinity in the Old Testament. Moses encounters Christ. And you see references to a figure, a person being present with the Israelites. Not just that they're you actually see moments that I didn't realize for a long time where it says the Lord spoke to the Lord. Like there's actually a figure with Moses speaking up to the Father. And then you get to the New Testament, and there's lots of other examples. You get to Saul encountering Christ on the road and becomes Paul. And all of these moments after the New Testament in the early church and the ecumenical councils, everyone who is speaking about God, that is one of the saints and holy people, they're not speaking from a collection of rational doctrines they have. They're speaking because they've actually met him. And this is the entire purpose of the church. So it's valuable on one hand to say, like I was saying earlier, well, you do these methods, you go to church, you have peace, and we could say you live a more moral life and you follow God's rules better. And there's truth to that. Those aren't bad things. But some of the most off-kilter people in Christian stories are the ones who are actually able to do everything else right, but they don't know Christ. And that's what the Pharisees' problem was they could keep this whole law God had given, and yet Christ called them whitewashed tombs, and they had no love. And Christ was like, I'd rather hang out with the sinners who have all these problems, but at least they'll be close to me. And if they're close to me, I can resolve all these things, which he says, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be given to you. It's not that, food is bad or sexuality is bad or wanting people to love you is bad or any of these things are bad. But if you're the God on your own and you control them, it leads to this very dark and lonely path. And so at the core of all things is the encounter with Christ. And this is what the church offers. This is what Orthodoxy says, come and see. Come and see if this is actually what's happening here. We're very much not into the believe blindly thing. We're very much into the like, yeah, we actually believe that you can come here and begin to encounter Christ alive in this family called the church. And so at the core of all of it is this personal encounter with him. And out of that, we believe flows everything else. And from there, there's a lot of, I can talk all about like little details of how Orthodox spirituality is therapeutic and healing, but it's nothing without him at the core. And this is what some people will look at Christianity and go, oh, it's symbolism about our inner spiritual life. These characters just represent this, and Adam and Eve just represent something. But that doesn't make sense unless it's pointing to an initial reality, if that makes sense. Like philosophically, there has to be a core reality for those symbols to point back to. And for the Orthodox, we believe that's Christ. Like love between a husband and wife exists and has its source in the Trinitarian love, that the three members of the Trinity offer love to each other unconditionally. And so God, birthing out of him and his love, made man and made woman so that they could have that love between God and each other. And then they have children, and that love spreads like a web outward. And that is what the church is to enter into this participation with the love that exists eternally in the Trinity. So yeah, so all the therapeutic methods in the end are to lead us into participation in this family and to transform us, because what sin is above all things is the inability to participate in that. It's not, oh, you're so disgusting. Oh my gosh, you're such a nasty person. It's, I'm upset and heartbroken about my sins because they're what keep me from participating in that. So the therapy is also to become the kind of person that can unconditionally participate in the love and reap that the intimacy that comes out of that level of sacrifice. And the opposite of this is the abuser. The abuser never enjoys true intimacy with those they abuse. Like it doesn't exist. They're not compatible to abuse someone and to enjoy the deep intimacy of actually loving them. They don't coexist. So God is taking us from being people who use creation and use other people and who use our niceness. I have a lot of experience with this, being nice to someone, and then when you don't get what you want, like I said earlier, we're angry. That prevents us from having true intimacy. Whereas as we approach God and we take on that unconditional sacrificial love, we have an unshakable peace, and we have a depth of, the saints talk about, we look at other people and we have Christ in our heart, and we see a beauty in them that we've never seen before, levels of beauty that are infinite and deep, and we start to see more of what God sees, and it becomes this whole different world of joy that is not fleeting pleasure, but is this deep and rich and sober divinity that we see in other people and in all of creation, God reflected in it. So anyways, yeah, I'm just lots of different angles on what the therapy is about deep down that is in the Fathers and in the Orthodox Church.
So that idea of forgiveness, I heard Professor John Verweke analyze the word forgiving. So forgiving, giving before even you asked for it, seeing the best potential. The forgiveness is a gift of grace that you extend to another person. And Christ, especially out of all the stories from Bible, there would be a leper. There would be somebody so sick and disgusted and being seen by the society as not a human being anymore. And he comes and Christ just like sees that human being and even cures. Like even being seen as a human being is already massive. Like disgusting people, people who are, they should not exist. I don't accept that. There are people, and Christ, I think, is the stories of him were extremely healing to me. Just those stories of seeing somebody that everybody else rejects, a person that has no hope and being rejected by themselves. It was, I don't know, maybe it symbolizes something, but to me it was so real and resonant that I could in the hardest of times, I found consolation in it.
There's a moment at the cross that Orthodox priest pointed out to me how important it is, where Christ is on the cross and he has, he's being in the process of being murdered. All his friends have rejected him. These people said Hosanna the week before, and now like they praised him, and now they're saying crucify him. So the ultimate betrayal, just all this horrible stuff. And I can see some people where I'm like, oh, they're homeless or they're sick or a leper or something, and I can be disgusted. But there's no one that my ego hates more than the person who like wrongs me and betrays me. Like that's worse than being dirty, is to like wrong me. And I know that if I was up on that cross in the situation Christ was in, I would be like, God, get them, like smite them, defeat them for what they've done to me. And I would be like, legally I'd be justified because they had wronged me, but he looks at them and he says something that is incredible. He says, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And the Father John Bear, in one of his talks, pointed out that, like, for all the stuff we do in the universe looking for the divine, trying ayahuasca and psychedelics or studying under gurus or whatever, he said this is the vision right here. Like, when you see Christ say this, he's had all this done to him and he says this, he's revealing the most divine thing in the universe, the very source of all that exists, that birth creation, that way Christ views his enemies, where he loves them unconditionally and unwaveringly. We're shown in that moment, this is what runs the universe. This is it right here. This rules everything. This is where we all came from. This is what we're all built for. We are inherently good as human beings. This is something that the Orthodox very much disagree with the West on. We're inherently good. We're just not being what we actually are. Like, we're not attuned to our true selves. And that's what Christ wants to do the therapy for. But this is what everything is about. And you can see, as you were mentioning, forgiveness naturally flows out of this. And likewise, if you don't have this, forgiveness is how you begin to participate in it. We can't just go from I'm bitter and I'm angry at someone, or at least I can't, to forgiving them. But if we want to participate with Christ and be close to him and acquire this love from him, we push ourselves to forgive. We are honest that we don't forgive. Lord, I should forgive this person, and I don't. We take all these active steps, and it's kind of like lifting weights. Like, it slowly. I'm not a good object lesson for lifting weights, but it's like that lifting weights. Each time you do it, even though you still have a lot of weakness, each time you push to forgive, you talk to God about it, it changes a little bit, and over a long time, it changes you a lot. And that's what our saints are, is people who live this life of laying aside everything that's for themselves and doing everything in their life for other people and for God. So that's what Christ says. The most important commandment is love God, and the second is like it, love your neighbor.
I 100% agree with you there. I think that, like, you mentioned it like five sentences ago, something like that's what the universe, that's what holds the universe together and what causes it to be in general, is love. And I'm not entirely sure if this, let's say, argumentation is already properly fleshed out that I'm trying to put forward, but I once listened to Jordan Peterson talk about love being, in a sense, the foundation of the universe, because in the beginning, that's how I understand it, God was standing in front of posed a rhetorical, maybe, but a question, which was, should there be something or should there be nothing? I mean, obviously, those were the two options, and the fact that things exist necessarily means that, I mean, obviously that he said yes, there should be something, but then also that's necessarily a loving decision, because like non-existence or extinction or something like that's a negating of existence, and an affirming of existence is necessarily a positive, and the basis of something positive is obviously love. Like, to me it's obvious. I don't know if there's holes in it, but to me it's obvious. And so that's part of what, like, this argument, and then also the nature of this kind of argument is what convinced me intellectually of Christianity, is that it has to have been love. And then when I try to talk to people about it who are more materialistic, then obviously that doesn't work, Because when I tell them, well, before the universe existed, there was the question if the universe should exist, then they're like, yeah, but who should have posed the question? And I'm trying to explain that that's not what I'm talking about. That's not how I mean it. But that's still what happens. So whenever something happens, there's obviously other options of things that could happen, and these options exist as potential, necessarily so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of Carl Rogers, one of the famous therapists of history, psychologists. He talks about how to be a good therapist, you have to have unconditional positive regard. And that's where the client, when they come to you, they know that no matter what they say, no matter what faults they have, no matter if they did something you both agree it was a thing they shouldn't have done, that you still regard them well. Maybe their deed was bad, maybe they have a problem, but you still, them at the core, you value. And he said all therapy is built on this. And I think he didn't realize he was pointing to the fact that this is a sign that we're built to be loved by God, to know his love and to thrive in it. And I think something I say often, is that the basis of psychological health is rooted in two things. And there's lots of other little nuances and whatever from psychology, spirituality, and whatnot. But the basis of psychological health is rooted in two things from my perspective. One is that there is a sovereign God that watches over everything, that has a plan, that guides things, and nothing happens that catches him off guard or without a purpose. And the other half of psychological peace is that God is loving, that he unconditionally positively regards us, that he has no thought for us but our well-being. And if one attunes himself to that and lives by that, which is what all of this stuff in Orthodoxy, reading the lives of saints, our prayers, it's all about, one has no reason to be anxious anymore. One has no reason to be afraid. One has no reason to lash out at other people, because all of these things are coping for a universe that we have to be the God. If there's no God, or if he's like one of these really like nasty Greek deities, like then we have a reason to be anxious and to be terrified. And honestly, at that point, it's the other extreme. There's no reason to hope or anything. But if the power that rules cares for us and is taking care of us, this is, the more we are attuned to this, then more naturally we stop being afraid, we stop worrying. And the scriptures talk about this, the saints talk about it all the time. My patron Elder Thaddeus says only those who leave everything to God can be truly light and truly peaceful. But I'm also a big believer, and I always clarify this to validate a lot of people who are outside the faith or have had bad experiences. I'm a big believer in the empirical nature of the faith, that it's something that's tangible. And I think it's not something that, it's not like a little mantra. There's a God and he protects me. It's something that only works in a healthy way if you actually experience it. And I think for a lot of, like, looking even at my past self as a Protestant, I wasn't experiencing that. So I heard Protestants say, just trust God, and it didn't bring me peace. And in Orthodoxy, the saints will say, just trust God, and it does, because it's actually, Christ says, taste and see that the Lord is good. And in Orthodoxy, I feel like there's been a radical difference that I can actually taste and see. And so, I know a lot of Protestants out there that are like, yeah, just trying to trust God more doesn't work. And I'm like, I don't blame you. I honestly don't blame you. It wasn't until Orthodoxy that trying to trust God actually produced a lot of peace in my life. So, and I think even the Buddhists, like I find it really interesting. Gautama Buddha noticed that when you live like there isn't a self, like you're just part of a whole and you're not an individual, which I don't agree with him on that, but I understand where he got that from. He noticed when you lived like that you were more at peace and you treated other people better. And so he concluded there must not be a self, it must be an illusion, because when you have a delusion, you're unhappy. And when I let go of this, I seem happier, and me and the people around me get along better when I don't live like I have a self. And he lived like the universe was fine. Like it didn't need him to fix things. It didn't need him to be in control, to be attached, as he called it. But I think Christ comes along and says, it's not that there isn't a self. It's that your self is sick. You do have an individuality to you. As Jordan Peterson talks about, you do have an individuality, but that self and that individuality is sick. And that's why when you lay that aside, you actually have a more peaceful life. But Buddha, treating the universe like it's one whole thing, you don't have to worry about it. Even psychology notes that when you practice acceptance, like a lot of studies on acceptance and whatever, people are happier. They know that this is true. This isn't just Christianity claiming this, but only Christianity knows why. And that's because there is a loving God who takes care of us and wants nothing but the best for us. As scripture says, God desires that no man should perish. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful point to end on. So please check out all the links below. Again, subscribe, give a follow, support, and see you in the next Food for Thought. Bye.
That's just the most extreme, horrifying description of toll houses. There's demons in them, and if you did bad things and you don't pay the toll, you don't get to go through. And so you're kept out of heaven because you didn't pay the toll to the demon for your sins.
Oh my God, did you just say toll houses?
I think I need confession. I pray to God, this time I learned my lesson. I'm on my knees and hope you can forgive me. You lay to rest my sin and my self-pity. The doors are shut, no letting in the vultures. The mask is cracked, part of a sinful culture. Whatever weakness now I might display, let it glorify you till the endless day. Been loved so often I could never count. You left your sheep and looked till I was found. Never thought someone could love me that much. Your willingness to pick up where we left off. In the end I'm always calling back to you. Ashamed of who I am, ashamed of what I do. You take my hand and make me stand on my feet. I'm not afraid anymore, I know that you can hear me.